I'm the president of Friends of Poetry that Anna has just talked about. I've been a writer forever, and I brought my little book that I keep track of my writing in. Here, it's really ugly, but I have 2,700 poems, is that right? 2,700 and some poems, and some of them are good. Many of them are not. I write about many different things, but I can sort of group them for you. I write about the past to try and figure it out. And this is a book about my father's last month of life called Last Hula. And every time I came home from visiting him, I would write a poem. I wouldn't reread it, I just set it aside. I could write it without feeling much, but if I read it again, I knew I would feel something. And so after it was all done and he passed away, then I could put it together into a book and sort of look at it again. And this book, The Shape of Dad, is also completely about my father, and sort of like Anna, I did not have a great relationship with my father, but he was a fascinating character. So, you know, and I'm still trying to figure out what that relationship was like for both of us. I write about the present to try and figure it out. I sometimes just write about a weird idea I have, or I hear a phrase that intrigues me, and that's where I start. I was telling Anna earlier that I heard some very conservative political commentators say that this one element only occurs in comets and blueberries. And I thought, who would ever put those two things together? I love that. So I had to use that. So I'm going to be presenting a workshop about generating poetry because that's what I do best. I just crank this stuff out. And my workshops will consist of short assignments to help ease writers into stepping outside the bounds of normal language and probably of normal behavior and normal conventions of how people should act. One difference between writers and non-writers is that writers don't censor that voice inside of them that is always at work, making connections, making snarky comments, noticing how one thing is like another, though it may not be obvious to anyone else. It is important to cultivate that voice through practice. So that's what I like to do. All of the butterflies waited on the biggest white pine. Their black and blue wings were folded like envelopes. Their orange wings were folded like origami cups, and their yellow wings looked like ticket stubs. The tree would have bowed under their weight if they had weighed anything. They waited for spring because she always came to them with pollen and nectar, but she was late. They'd waited for weeks in the cold, and their shivering shook the limbs. Any remaining snow fell on the shoulders of the earth. A monarch plunged to the ground dead. Then another, like autumn suddenly, butterflies cascading down like maple leaves. From far away, the sound of migratory birds, closer until spring burst in her bright green robes. She gathered up the fallen monarchs, swallowtails, painted ladies in her hands, and breathed her warm words onto them. I'm so sorry, so sorry. They stirred, twitched, and came back to life. She glittered pollen all over the tree, and nectar kissed the branches like powdered sugar. Only one swallowtail was lost, but that was one too many. She tucked him in her pocket with the other agonies, to remember she was far from perfect.
Hi, my name is Robin Church, and I started writing when I was a young girl as well. I came to Kalamazoo in 1976. I thought I was going to be a social worker, but that didn't work out. So instead, I continued to pursue my English degree with a creative writing emphasis. That also didn't work out very well. It wasn't very lucrative, but lots of things happened in between me coming back to Western and getting my degree in early childhood education. So I've worked with 4-year-olds for 26 years and then stopped. And that's when I returned to poetry in Kalamazoo, where I was welcomed very graciously. I'm really grateful for that. It first came about by going to a yoga class, and one of the women in the yoga class, Deborah Gang, was a writer, and I got to be in the writers group that she was a part of called Verge, and I ran into Elizabeth at the Poetry Festival at the Kalamazoo Institute of Arts and ended up being voted onto the board of Friends of Poetry. And so I'm back! The workshop that I'm going to be presenting is about a childhood memory. I write about, I think my inspiration comes from reading other writers and listening to other writers, and just from, as Anna has said, from life, from relationships, and from working things out. And so I had things to work out in my childhood. And so the workshop that I would like to guide people through would be writing about a childhood memory. We'll start out doing some word play to get warmed up, and then I think it's important in a poem to experience as much as you can via all the senses. I seem to be drawn into poems that I feel like I can touch and taste and smell and hear and see. I use a lot of imagery in my poems. So we'll be ending up with a descriptive poem about a childhood event, and hopefully some submissions to the Poems That Ate Our Ears contest. So since I want to be doing that kind of poetry with students, I thought I would read some of my own poems about my childhood. My father cruises woodward in a blue Chevy from Wayne State to his small apartment. Big typewriter words fall out of his mouth onto the dinner table. "Do you know how to spell tsetse fly?" he asks, and I do. He is delighted. His words pile up as I bite into my fish stick. My stepmother appears carrying her Weight Watchers plate and adds words to his. She quizzes me about the Six-Day War and the riots in Detroit, Vietnam, and China as I twirl a French fry in ketchup. I don't know the answers. She frowns as I lick my fingers. Their words continue to stack on top of each other, so thick I can't see their faces, but their voices get louder and louder. I crawl under the table, propping it up with my scrawny legs, afraid it will cave in. I wonder if there are cookies for dessert, I think, turning my blonde head towards her feet. I love chocolate chip cookies, but Oreos are good too, I think, and milk, or chocolate cupcakes.